Some of the best games ever made should have not worked at all. Like if you heard the idea on paper, you'd think, that's too simple, too weird, and too random. But one person made it anyway, and somehow it became massive. And the craziest part, before they made it, they almost always quit. Today, I'm breaking down games made by one person that should not work, but they do. Stardew Valley. On paper, Stardew Valley is just a farming game. Plant crops, fish, talk to villagers, grow stuff. That sounds way too quiet, way too slow, way too simple to become a giant hit. But here's what nobody talks about. Eric Barone worked on this alone for 4 years. No team, no backup, no safety net. He coded everything, wrote everything, designed everything, and made all the music himself. For a long time he was asking himself, is this ever going to be done? Is this good enough? What if nobody cares? There were nights where he probably wondered if this was even worth it. He had to handle every bug, every patch, every complaint, all by himself. And when it launched, it blew up. Became one of the most beloved games of all time. But behind that success is a huge mountain of frustration, doubt, and a lot of late nights. And that's why Stardew Valley works. It feels like someone refused to give up on an idea, even when it looked like it was gonna fail. Then there's Undertale. Was it too weird to succeed? Undertale looks like a tiny retro RPG with simple graphics and weird humor. And honestly, that kind of game usually does not become a massive cultural thing. But here's where it almost went wrong. Undertale started as a small Kickstarter for a long time. Toby Fox was making all the music, all the writing, all the code, and all the design by himself. He was still in school, running out of money, short on time, stressed about whether the game would even be done. There were times when he was like, what if people hate this? What if it's too weird? What if nobody gets it? The game was almost too strange. Toby almost diluted it by making it more normal, but then he didn't. He kept it weird, and he kept it personal, kept it exactly how he wanted it. That's why Undertale works. It wins you over with writing, music, and the way it keeps surprising you. It's doing a lot with a little. Simple look, weird tones, small scale, that usually sounds like a niche game, but it becomes huge because every part of it was intentional. It feels like a very specific vision, and that's exactly why people remember it. Papers, please. Boring on paper, intense in practice. You're checking documents at a border checkpoint. That's the pitch. That's the game. And that's why it should not work. When people hear a game concept, they expect action, adventure, combat, or something flashy, not paperwork, stamps, rules, waiting, or stress. Here's where this almost went wrong. Lucas Pope was working on a game that was way more complicated than he wanted. It was getting bloated, messy. Then he realized he was building something too big for him to handle alone. He stripped it down to the core. Just the paperwork, just the decisions, and just the tension. He almost made it too complicated, almost made it impossible to finish, but then he cut it down, focused, and suddenly, the game started to feel real. The genius is that it takes a boring job and turns it into tension. You start caring because every mistake matters, every decision matters, every choice feels heavy. And that's why it works. It takes something that sounds unfun and makes it one of the most intense games ever made. That's crazy for a solo dev. And then obviously we have Minecraft. From a really messy test to a global phenomenon. Minecraft sounds ridiculously simple if you strip it down. Blocks, building, surviving. That's basically the whole thing. And that sounds like it should get old really fast. A game that simple should run out of steam pretty quick, right? But here's the rough part. Minecraft started as a small personal project by Marcus Persson. It was essentially a test. He was just messing around, not trying to build a huge hit, just trying something out. For a while it was super rough. Bugs everywhere, mechanics unstable. It was barely a game. And then people started watching, playing, talking about it. That's when the pressure started. He went from just making something fun to, wow, I have to keep making this thing work. And he was still doing it mostly by himself. That's the moment it could have fallen apart. The attention came faster than he was ready for. But it doesn't fall apart, because Minecraft does something really smart. It gives you freedom. It lets the player decide what the game even is, and that's why it works. The simplicity is the point. The game becomes whatever you want it to be, and the fact that it started from one person's idea makes it even crazier. It turns something that could have just been a weird little experiment into one of the biggest games ever made. Balatro sounds like it should have been a novelty at best. It's poker, but also not poker. Cards, but with weird combos, upgrades, and chaos everywhere. On paper, that sounds like one of those games that people try for 10 minutes and then forget about. But here's where it almost didn't happen at all. The dev was working on Balatro for a long time, and for a while, the game just wasn't clicking. Mechanics felt clunky, combos weren't satisfying, the game just felt okay. For a while, it looked like Balatro might just have been another short-lived project that never ships. But then the dev found the right loop, the right combo system, that right balance, and suddenly it was fun. That's when everything changed. Balatro works because the loop is insanely strong. You keep finding new combos, new runs, new ways to break the game in the funnest ways possible. That's the reason it doesn't fall apart. It takes a familiar idea, twists it just enough, and turns it into something that feels addictive. And again, one person made that happen. Cave Story. Cave Story looks like a pretty standard platformer at first glance. That alone wouldn't usually make it stand out in a huge way. But here's the real story. Pixel spent 5 years making the game alone. 5 years, just one person. There were times that he wasn't sure if the game was even good enough. He wasn't sure if players would care. He wasn't sure if all the time was worth it at all. He poured all that time into something that might not matter. But he kept going. Cave Story works because it has charm, tight gameplay, and a world that feels bigger than the visuals suggest. It's the kind of game that reminds you good design can carry a lot. What makes it feel like it shouldn't work is how much it accomplishes with so little. It doesn't look like some type of giant production. It still ends up feeling memorable and complete, and that's a huge reason people still bring it up. Thomas Was Alone. If you describe Thomas Was Alone fast, it sounds almost too plain. It's basically shapes moving around. It's not exactly a pitch that screams, must play game. And here's the rough part. Mike Bithell was working on this small project, but he wasn't sure if it would ever become more than that. He wasn't sure if people would care about it. Talking rectangles? He was worried it was too simple, too weird, too unmarketable. But he leaned into the narration, leaned into the personality, leaned into that idea that even shapes could feel like characters. That's when it clicked. Thomas Was Alone works because the narration and personality carry everything. It takes something super minimal and gives it emotion, humor, and way more charm than you expect. That's the kind of game that should not work on paper, but totally does because the dev knew exactly what it needed. And honestly, that's the theme with a lot of these games. They don't work because they're huge. They work because they're focused. What makes these games so cool is that they prove a big point. A game doesn't need to look like a giant blockbuster to hit hard. It doesn't need a massive team to feel important. It doesn't need the safest idea in the world to succeed. Each of these games had a moment where it looked like it might fail, and they had doubt. They had bugs, they had burnout, they had moments where they were asking themselves, is this even worth it? But they just kept going. Sometimes the weird idea is a good idea. Sometimes the tiny idea is one that turns into something massive. That's why solo-made games are interesting. They feel like somebody took a chance on something other people might have called too risky, too simple, or too strange, and they made it work anyway. That's inspiring, because it means the bar for making something great is not have a giant studio. Sometimes it's just have a strong enough idea and keep going. So yeah, that's my list. Games that should have never worked, ideas that sounded too small or too weird, projects that one person somehow turned into something way bigger than expected, and every single one of them had a moment where it almost didn't happen, where the dev almost quit, where the game almost fell apart. That's why solo-made games will always be cool, because every now and then one person proves that the most unlikely idea became the most memorable game. If you want more of these videos, like it, maybe subscribe, and let me know in the comments what's your favorite solo-made game. Thanks for watching.